Welcome to What's the Point? A weekly discussion of truth, realities, challenges, theological and philosophical views, national policies, and international concerns. Welcome to What's the Point? Today, it's actually 4th of July, so that's awesome. Freedom Day for America. But we are going to be continuing with our series on the life and ministry of Jesus. And we're going to be talking about some important issues that was discussed at his Sermon on the Mount. From this, we're going to be really discussing from Matthew 5. So let's get started really with what are the issues that were discussed by Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount. That if you want to start with that.
Yeah. Well, I think we're doing part 1 today. Is it chapter 5 of Matthew?
Yeah. So it's multiple parts. Yeah.
Yeah. And as we normally know, that the Sermon on the Mount is not preached to a crowd. It is preached to the disciples when they were in the mount. So this is more like a discipleship training for his disciples. And Jesus discussed very important topics about the whole gamut of a Christian lifestyle. So it touched on almost all the issues that a person, or particularly a Christian disciple or leader, will have to address. So here the Lord touch, and then maybe we can go one by one later on, touch on really critical subject, especially putting a New Testament perspective to an otherwise Old Testament command. And the Old Testament is more like literal. So, but Jesus went not, as they say, in the letter of the law, but in the substance of the law. So then maybe we can go one by one. At we already finished Beatitudes there, and so we can go. Yeah.
What do you think, Josh and AB? Do you guys kind of have an idea of what like these big issues, at least for this part 1 in Matthew 5 that Dad was talking about, kind of like a background before we go for each item?
When it comes to Matthew 5, obviously the Beatitudes we mentioned before, it's important to consider like just the aspect of what it means to, like Dad said, to be a true disciple of God, and to go and kind of think about what that means, and just kind of like get to the heart of loving enemies, or praying for those who persecute you, and just a lot of these different concepts.
I think it's really interesting to kind of piggyback off what Harold was saying and what Josh is saying. Like, in order for you to receive the message that Jesus was telling the disciples had to be in a fairly mature state to receive them. You know what I mean? They already had to have been studying Jesus. They already had to have received the main foundational principles of what it means to follow God. And so I feel like sometimes if you're not mature and you're exposed to the Mount on the Sermon or other things in the Bible, it may push you back. It may be confusing to you. It may just not register to you how it's supposed to, because you're just not there yet. So I think that's a good, important distinction to make. Like, you have to be in a certain mindset and a certain willingness to follow God in order to receive what he's trying to teach you.
Yeah, and I think that's important what you said, that because like that I said, this is not really preached more to the crowd, but more to his disciples. So you kind of have to have a general understanding, and kind of like Dad said, putting it in a more New Testament form, that is not just like how they would have handled it before, like in the Old Testament, like certain sins or certain issues, you would have been put to death immediately, for like those things. So it's a little bit different on here, but let's go ahead and go through it one at a time so it would make more sense.
If you look at verse 13, Jesus was talking about being salt and light. After teaching them about Beatitudes, Jesus taught them about how to be salt and light. And salt and light are very important concepts at the time. So he was saying that you need the salt to flavor, and you need the light to lighten the darkened world. And if you lose your saltiness, you will not be effective anymore. So he was telling the disciples, you must be a good example. So it now sets the premise. These are the right attitudes. You be the salt. You know the analogy of salt. It flavors, it
Yeah.
preserves, it you know, and then so that should be who we should be. We should flavor, we should preserve, and then light. We should be the light in the darkness. We should direct. And then he talks about very important about the law, which is the foundation. That Jesus came not to destroy the law, but to fulfill it. So he's not contradicting the Old Testament. He's there to fulfill the law. So that even the law, the Ten Commandments, they were made, actually, the Ten Commandments were made to make a person perfect. So he does not sin. Thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal. So the intention of the law is to make a person perfect, but no matter how he does it, he cannot be perfect. So he needs someone, and Jesus fulfilled it, because Jesus said we're all sinners, but if we believe in him, he can fulfill what the law wanted in us. Then it talks about anger. So instead of just the actual anger, was dealing really with the substance of anger, which is deep inside. Then it talks about adultery here, which the substance is really lust. Talks about divorce and marriage, and the essence of it. He talks about making a promise and fulfilling it. He talks about revenge, and that revenge should be taken from the perspective of grace. Then he talks about even loving your enemies. Now, these are really at the time. These kinds of teachings are revolutionary to the ears of the disciples, who were used to be hearing the Old Testament literal commands, and this is more like, really, is that how it should be? So then we can go item by item if you would like.
Yeah.
There, I
Go ahead.
something-
Amy.
okay. So for verse 13, something really caught my attention. It says, "You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt has become tasteless, how can it be made salty again?" I was learning about salt and the minerals that it's able to give your body, and even the water that we drink. If it doesn't have minerals in it, then it's not able to disperse the water to your tissues and your organs to hydrate you. So a lot of people are actually chronically like dehydrated because they don't have the essential minerals they need. And it's interesting that God's saying, you are the salt, meaning you are the salt. You have the minerals you need. You have the minerals to nourish not only yourself, but other people that you teach with God's word. But it says salt can also become tasteless. So I'm just kind of wondering if you have any more insight on like maybe what he's saying here in terms of like, can you be a Christian and then, lose kind of your motivation? Is that what he's saying? Lose your kind of...
No, not necessarily. I think what it was saying here with salt is more of your testimony. And therefore, if you lose your testimony, it's very hard to regain it. Yeah, you can seek forgiveness, but somehow, if you lose your testimony, it's very, very hard to lead again. That happens even in relationships, in the company, so that's the reason why God is saying preserve the saltiness of your soul, because that's very good illustration of salt in the body. But salt also here can be the usefulness of salt as either a preservative, a flavor for food, and all this. So if there is no saltiness in it, how can it flavor a food? How can it preserve something? So there is no use for it anymore.
I think it's interesting how he said it is no longer good for anything at all except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. Like you're not just gonna throw salt. Like he's saying the only thing that's good for is people to step over you. Basically, you're like, you not to be at all.
Yeah, it's the same context with him using it as light. In a related passage is that if you had the light, you don't put it under sort of a cover that you don't see the
Right,
light. And,
it should be open, yeah.
yeah, it should be open. It should dispel darkness. So it talks. I think it talks more of your testimony, your witness, your influence. Now, and normally, if something bad, most likely sin, a major sin that happens, and you lose your testimony, you lose your effectiveness, you lose your your reputation in the ministry, particularly, and that's the sad thing about it. And God, and very important that God, Jesus, taught it as among the first of in importance here because it's the second to the Beatitudes. So it is an important concern.
Yeah, and it's really good that he brought it up at the beginning because it
Yeah,
kind of also shows that I guess as leaders or as like disciples, we're kind of held at like um at a higher standard than like the rest because we're supposed to be be better examples. So kind of like the light um and how we should be a light to like a dark world. We're kind of just held at a higher like at a higher standard. And I think Jesus is kind of talking about that in when he was discussing like being the salt of the earth. Um, what do you think about that, Josh? Do you have something to add on that aspect before we move on to the law, the fulfillment of the law?
For me, it's just like, I guess like when it comes to the, Saul and light portion of it, like, as a disciple, he wants the disciples to understand, like, hey, in a way that's, in layman's terms, you're gonna be like my hands and feet, and so you're gonna be a representation of who I am. And essentially, what Jesus is doing is he's preparing his disciples for his burial and resurrection by telling them these concepts. They don't see it at the moment, but what he's saying is that, like, I am the light of the world. Do not let the light that I put in you shine wherever you go, and don't let it simmer. Same thing with the testimony that you have in this life. Whatever you may have gone through, like, use that to win people over to Christ. And so that's the
Yeah.
same call to us as, whoever listening today, is that the past mistakes that you had or the spirit influence that you have at the moment, use that for to advance God's kingdom in any way you can think of.
Yeah, that's pretty good that you say that, even though some people may think that, oh, I'm too blemished or have too many problems already, I can't be an effective leader. We have to remember that Jesus, that's why Jesus came to save us, and that if we repent and we change our life, we could use our past mistakes to be like a better example and to touch more lives. But so that, I mean, that's really good discussion on the salt and light. What about the part on the fulfillment of the law? I know, Dad, you mentioned that it was that Jesus came to fulfill the law and not contradict it. So
and this
why
is
did
important. Yeah, this is
yeah,
important,
why
Karen,
did he have to
because
discuss it? Why did he even have to bring it up?
yeah, because it was during these times, especially in the Jewish culture, the observance of the law is very primordial. Is that the right word? Primordial? Meaning it's primary. It's of supreme importance. So all the ceremonies revolve around the fulfillment of the law. But in many cases, it has become a ritual. It has become like a duty, and they were losing the substance of it. Now, but then he will be teaching important things following this. So he was saying, no, I am not here to destroy, not even remove any part of the law, but I'm going to destroy. But here is the something like confusing thing here when he said in verse 20, for I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. So he was saying, even if whatever you do, you fulfill the whole law, but you try to, but you still miss it. You cannot even surpass the righteousness of the Pharisees. So none of you can really enter the kingdom of heaven.
I give an example.
Yeah.
Verse 20, an example, like in the Greek, when it was written, like the word essentially like surpasses, has, because in Greek it has, when they give you words, it sometimes there's associations with different images and stuff. So with this particular word in Greek, the image that one gets surpassing wise is that of an ocean. So if now you were to read this verse 20 again, what Jesus is saying is that unless your righteousness far surpasses that imagery, far surpasses that of an ocean of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. So the context behind what Jesus is saying is, maybe some people might think like, oh well, I have done good works, or maybe have potentially surpassed the works of the Pharisees. That's bad news, because he's saying not only do you have to surpass it, we have to surpass it that of a vast ocean. And I don't know if you guys know what the Pharisees did. Hold on. But what they did was they memorized the entire Old Testament. I don't think people can do that today. And so, but that's just one drop. Jesus is saying you have to far exceed that standard of an ocean if you want to get into heaven with your own works.
Well, it was also Pharisees, like they knew scripture forwards, backwards, sideways, any direction possible, but they weren't necessarily following what they read. That's why God says for his followers, it was easier for them in a sense to accept Christ because they saw him for who he was. And the Pharisees didn't have, what's the word? They knew the scripture, but they didn't see Jesus when he actually came. So
yeah, because they didn't really I think what I think that's really powerful, because like basically Jesus was saying that if it was works based, like then you would have, like you said, Josh, you would have to like memorize the whole Old Testament plus a whole ocean more of works, right? So he's kind of already setting the ground, like the framework that the standard that basically it's only through Jesus that you can get into heaven.
And I think one example of standard is I preached about this past Sunday, and I think maybe some people still might not understand what standard means as far as like God's standard compared to maybe some other people. So like I want to in essence just kind of express this logic of like standard in layman's terms. Maybe people will understand it if I explain it this way. So imagine this. So I grew up playing high level basketball, and I played basketball with a lot of different people. And it's cool because some of the people I played with actually are now in the NBA. So that's the standard of playing that I played at. So I played high level basketball essentially, and good basketball. And a lot of my teammates in high school, if you were to ask them, and even my youth, I'm a youth pastor, so if you ask my youth who have seen play basketball, if you were to ask them, hey, does Josh have a good jump shot? Does Josh have a good shot, 3-point shot, let's say? Their answer would be, most answers would be, if not all answers would be, he does have a good jump shot. He does have a good jump shot. And my youth would say that, maybe my teammates would say that. But the concept of it is, notice that's the standard of my teammates and it's the standard of my youth. Now, if I frame the question to another person, the answer would be completely different. Now, this person is named Steph Curry. If I were to ask the same question to Steph Curry, it's not even a question, not even arguable. He is the best shooter of all time. He has the best 3-point shot, and it's not even close. If you were to ask him, hey, if you see me play, if you see my shot, if you ask him, hey, is Josh's shot good? He would say, no, it's not good.
Right.
And the
Because
reason why, because his standard for excellence and good is far greater than my teammate standards in high school or my youth standards. Therefore, that's the same thing with this verse 20. Jesus is setting the standard, knowing I am the only one that can fulfill this standard, nobody else. So don't even try.
Yeah, basically that's what he's saying, is that there's nowhere that, like, he came to fulfill the law, and he's like the standard, and there's no one can like exceed that standard. Which I think it's a good.
That's a good. Yeah, that's a good point, because the law was actually given by the Lord so that we can technically at least approximate or meet his standards, but we can't. So he
Yeah.
fulfilled it by providing his son. So
Yeah,
we can meet the standards by grace.
Yeah.
The laws meant to expose our sin, essentially,
Yeah.
and a need for a sin.
No, and it's actually a good segue, because like as he talks about, basically like he's the standard, we need him, and no matter what we do, we cannot like exceed, or we can't get ourselves into heaven just by our works. Then he goes into a couple different specific issues and how to handle it. I think that you first said the version that I'm reading is talking about murder, but I know it could also be anger. Is that what your version is saying? Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, that's correct. For example, the Old Testament, the Ten Commandments said you shall not murder. So it was talking about murder. But Jesus said that the substance or the root cause of murder is anger, or some form of hatred, or some form.
Yeah.
In other words,
And
yeah.
Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah. So in other words, Jesus was not looking at the surface or the letter or the of the command, but the inner part. What causes this action? So let's address that. I mean, that was, and you will notice that in succeeding teachings, that he did not talk about the superficial aspect of the command. He was looking at the substance, why you do that. So why do a person murder? What is it? Rage, anger. Yeah.
It starts with the thought. It's really interesting too, because after that verses, but I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother shall be answerable to the court. He gives levels for the punishment of the word that you say to somebody, the amount of anger that you've allowed to creep into your heart. He said, whoever says to his brother, you good for nothing, shall be answerable to the Supreme Court. And whoever says, you fool, shall be guilty enough to go into the fiery hell. So I think it's interesting that he's giving kind of levels to the words that you use, and like the amount, like I was saying, the amount of anger and rage that you've allowed to like seep into your being. Because think about it, like any murder doesn't just start with someone just randomly murdering someone.
It always starts.
It's a malicious murder. That person has to start.
Go ahead. Yeah, it, like you mentioned, it starts with a thought, because if you were to even think about the aspect of murder in a court of law, there's the difference of like murder versus like homicide, for example, and like murder has to have the difference of murder and like homicide is like premeditation. So you have to have thought about it for them to say that it's murder. And so I think that that's a pretty big thing, where it starts with like the root cause, like the issue that is causing it. And I think on this aspect, Jesus said that you're supposed to, when anger creeps up, you're supposed to, it says here, settle matters quickly. So in verse 25, settle matters quickly with your adversary who is taking you to court. Do it while you're still together on the way, or your adversary may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown in prison. So it's kind of saying that don't even let it go that far. Handle it while it's still fresh, or while you could still fix it before it gets worse.
Yeah, and more so in verse 23, it also said, when you are going to offer something, and you are holding a grudge or something, you leave your offering first, go and settle it. 23 and 24. So this is very important that you do not let anger develop into grudge and hatred and let it stay there, because the longer an anger stays with you, it's like cancer. It metastasizes into rage. So he was saying that when you go and make an offering and you are harboring something, you better settle it first. Now, if you do this in church, and the pastor said, okay, before we start the service, I would like you to go and settle your grudges with each other. You will have an empty church.
Because everybody's always have something that they're...
The church they will leave first and go home and settle with everybody, and then whoa, I will leave as well and settle with my wife.
Yeah. That is...
because it's even the basics that he's asking us to do. We can't even, it's far easier for us to listen to someone say something and actually
do it. Yeah.
It's the same principle, Kerry, when you go again to adultery. It was
Yeah,
really about
like
lust.
Adultery and the
and lust.
root cause is lust. Yeah.
Lust. Yeah. So Jesus was dealing with the causes of what was supposed to be a public sin. He was really going deep and saying, no, this is a personal issue. Adultery is really lust. So it even said, with just the eyes, you already lust.
It kind of goes back to verse 15 where it says, therefore, whoever nullifies one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. So you're still saved. But let's say you're a Christian and you have this grudge, you have whatever sin that you're hiding, you're nullifying the law. You're listening to whatever the pastor is saying, but you're nullifying it in your heart. You're saying, I'm not going to do that. And people are watching us. People are watching how we're responding to the world around us, how we're responding to our own sin. How do people look at us when we have sin inside, but we're still calling ourselves a Christian? He's saying we're nullifying the law that he gave us. And he says, because of that, you will be named the least in the kingdom of heaven. You're still saved, but you're not going to be great in the kingdom of heaven. You're going to be the least. And I just think that's incredibly interesting because, myself included, I have probably hidden sins I don't know about and sins that I've held on to for a long time. And thank God that he's given us the ability to ask him to let that go. So it's not hindering, our relationship with him or anybody else. But I just think that's interesting that
But again, adultery here, thou shalt not commit adultery, but really Jesus said the root cause of that is lust. And he was talking that lust even really starts with the eyes. And in other portion of scriptures, it's lust of the eyes, lust of the flesh, pride of life. But he even said that whatever part of your body causes it, cut it off, take it off. So it's the analogy here, the imagery is that if your eyes causes you to sin, take it out. I mean, remove it. It's a very serious imagery. If your hands cut it off. And the cause of adultery is really lust. Billy Graham once said that the first look, a man's first look at the passing woman is appreciation. The second is lustful. So, and it even starts with the eyes. So, if you try to address adultery in the world, you should really address lust. The problem is that even advertisers around the world know this, and even advertisement is a medium for lust. So that you will lust for the product. So even those in the advertising, they even play with this on the other side of it.
Yeah. And they're using it because they know that as humans we're weak, and we, they know how to tempt people. And I don't know if they normally necessarily say we're gonna tempt people just to tempt them, but I think that they profit off of people's weakness, even though it doesn't, that's really the deeper if you look at it deeper, they profit off advertisements, they know that they could tap into someone's lustful desires. It doesn't even have to be just with a person. It could also be for things. You could also lust for items.
Yeah, the best example of that, in the world, one of the most noted at using that is Mexican advertising. If you notice Mexican advertising, you would not see the products until the end of it. So you see a woman walking, dancing, hola, and it's already like almost 28 seconds. And then at the last 2 seconds, Pepsi.
Yeah.
So
So you
know,
don't even have really, like, they don't even show the product to begin
the
with.
product.
They
They say the
entice.
beautiful woman walking,
Yeah.
hola, and then Pepsi. You see, see how they use laugh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
And here, watch this. If the product is like cigarettes, wine, they use a woman because it's a men's product.
mhm.
But if it's a ladies' products, they normally use either a handsome man so that the lady gets the attention and then sees the product.
Yeah, and they'll watch all the way to the end because they already
Yeah.
see this like good
Yeah.
looking person. But I mean, I think that just from the couple topics that we've discussed right now, it seems like in these preachings and these teachings, Jesus, like the main point, like I've been taking notes from what you guys have been saying, the main point that he's really trying to get at is not like the actual like surface problem, but more of like
Yeah.
a root cause. So I don't know if you guys had anything else to add, or if we could like go to what's the point and do like what's the main point, like what's the point of talking about these issues? Like, why do we need to discuss it? Like, why do we need to go really deep into each of these? What's the point of this conversation?
Well, for me, what Jesus was really teaching the substance more than the surface, and that's the reason why he said, "If any man," in other portions of scriptures, he said, "If anyone is in Christ, he is a new creature, or a kainos zoe, a new life, a new creation." Because when Christ comes to us, he will really change the inner core of us, not just the superficial thing. And that's the reason why we struggle. So we know now it's wrong, not from the outside, but from the inside. And that's the beauty with Christianity as against other religions, because it deals with the inside, the core substance of our being, not the superficial practice. Like other religions,
Yeah.
just look at the superficial practices that maybe will lead you to heaven. And none of those can lead us. Only Christ, who can perfect it, who can lead us to heaven. So for those who are watching, you can do whatever you do, it can never lead you to heaven. Only Jesus Christ can. Because for all of sin that comes short of the glory of God, and only him can be the sacrifice so that finally we can be forgiven and given a chance to go to heaven.
That's good. What's the point for you, Josh and Avi? You guys can decide who wants to go first.
I feel like there's so much here, but kind of going back to what you were saying, Carrie, we really have to take what Jesus says seriously and not treat sin like as if it's trivial. We still are going to fall, and that's part of the human nature, but God paints a picture of how actually serious sin really is. What Harold was saying is like, cut off your arm, take out your eyes. If it's causing you to sin, remove it completely. How often do we just allow sin to creep in and we're not taking an aggressive approach to stop it? You know what I mean? It's just so laissez-faire. Like, oh, I'll get around to like asking God for forgiveness. I'll go around to repenting. I'll think about that later. It's like not an aggressive approach, because we are a new creation, but we're not treating ourselves and our relationship with God as if it's serious. Because we're not only are we on the line, but evil's contagious. Like, our actions can really affect someone else, I guess.
Yeah.
So that's my wrap up of what I've been reading.
Yeah. And what do you think, Josh? Like, what's the point of, like, why did Jesus teach these kind of to the disciples first? And what's the point of talking about it?
I think for me, what, the point of this discussion and the point of what's the point of life essentially is let's say you're a disciple of Christ, and so and you now understand maybe through this podcast or just like in general, like through just life that when you're a disciple of Christ, you have to kind of now you understand how that happened. But the main thing that we have to first address is we become essentially disciples of God through Jesus Christ, because we cannot the Old Testament is all about humanity trying to live up to the standards that God has, but time and time again it's they failed. And honestly, if one were to look at this idea in the Old Testament, like Jesus tells people that God it's God still, but before Jesus in human form, God the Father told these people in the Old Testament the aspect of, if you guys want your sins to be absolved or taken away, you have to do animal sacrifice. And that's important to consider, because if you look at it this way, people were so like against God and were sinning so much that when it came to sacrifices of animals, it came to the point, if you just do simple like basic math calculations, it came to the point that there was no longer enough animals to cover all the sins of man. Like if I were to just like explain it to you like this, let's just say these days, let's just say like nowadays, around 8 billion people in the world. Now, who knows how many times a person sins a day? It could be one, or it could be 100, it could be 1,000. We don't know. Even the thoughts that we have, which thoughts are thousands a day and stuff, like even those that we have could be sins, as we have seen. Meaning, now what does that mean? If you look at it, 8 billion people, and then times that by 1,000, if like even with that alone, maybe times that 8 billion times 100, even that alone, and that's one day of sins, is more than maybe the entirety of all of animal creation.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just
that's just one day.
Yeah. Don't do that. Just if it's just one chicken per sin, we will lose all the chickens in the world in one day.
In one day,
easily.
So it's basically, he's basically saying that like you can't, like, this works-based type of mentality won't work, because really, like, first of all, it's not even like feasible, and there's just no way to like live up to the standard that God has set, right? And that's why we need Jesus. That's what you guys are kind of like getting at.
Exactly. One thing I'm going to say too is that when we assess the point of life X, Y, Z, let's say you're a Christian now, and so you accept Christ into your heart, then the follow through there essentially is, so I asked this maybe like growing up, then what's the point of my life at this point forward? The point is this: is we should wake up every day knowing that each day is a blessing from God, but also it's beautiful because it's a day, that we can spend being more conformed to His image. And so that's the goal of Christianity, is not only spreading the gospel throughout the whole world, which is, he says that in Matthew as well. Now that you're a disciple of mine, spread this word that I have, spread the idea and my salvation to all the world. Not only that, but on an intimate level, like I want you to be molded like me on earth. That way, when you get to heaven, it's just like
you're an example to the people you're ministering to.
An example to people at the same time too. You're preparing yourself for heaven.
Exactly.
Because then you become more conformed to His image. Kind of like, I say this illustration a lot, the image of gold and how a gold maker knows it's good gold is that, first you have to be refined through fire. sometimes that fire could look like God's discipline, as we see of like the things that we go through, the sins that we have. He loves us, so sometimes he will discipline us so that we learn from those things and not do those things anymore. So then as a result of that, it makes us closer with God. It allows us to see which things we need to cut out, which means that as we every day look at ourselves in the mirror, it should be more closer to what Jesus looks like, kind of like that gold maker. The gold maker knows it's good gold, and the goal is getting to that point of sanctification. When the gold maker can see that, when they look at the gold, which is the gold in this scenario is a representation of our lives. When the gold maker, who's Jesus, sees our lives, he finally sees his reflection in the gold.
Yeah.
And so that's something to strive for and look forward to each day. And just as long as you think about that, it allows you actually to sin less. Because if you come out of in an approach of like, I need to sin less, it's not going to happen, because that's all you think about is not sinning. And then, actually, like, people, like scientists have said that the more you think about like the sin XYZ, actually the more you will do it. That's why God says, place your minds on things that are good, holy, and pleasing.
Yeah.
Because he knows, don't look at those things. And so what I'm saying is that, like, each of us should be motivated each day to thank God, wow, I have another day to look more like you, Jesus, today. And so and well, so.
Yeah, I think that's really good. How you said that the gold maker, to determine what is a good standard, is that he could see himself through that. And I think that's a really good way, for like a thing for us to strive, is to try to be like Jesus in that aspect. But if we don't have anything else to add, I can go ahead and close us in prayer. Dear Lord, thank you so much for this time that we can discuss your word, that we can learn about how to be better disciples, and how to really live a life that would mirror your life. Help us to stay, not be tempted, and help us to get through any issues that we're going through, because we can't do it by ourselves. We always need you, and it's only through you that we can get into heaven. I pray for anyone who is watching this podcast, that they may be blessed, and that they may understand what you're teaching, speak to their hearts. And if they would like to accept you in their hearts, I would pray that they would ask you to come in their lives, Lord. Thank you for the time together that we can discuss this. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.